This DVD is being made because I was one of the only employees at Weyerhaeuser around all that off-highway equipment that I had a camera with me at all times and took loads of pictures, and I'm one of the only ones left with all those pictures available. And the off-highway equipment never will be seen again. It's not ever going to get in use again. So I'm making this DVD just so you can enjoy what I used to see every day. Enjoy the pictures. The group that's in front of you now is Red Bramblett, Babe Boschman, Don Wickendall, Mel Sackett, Stan Bird, and Tom Swanton. All of them have a story if I wanted to ask them for one, but I want to talk about Don Wickendall because he was the superintendent on the Allegheny side. So let's give you a story of what happened to Don at one point along the way. Now, this story is one that Ed Longdon told it to me, and he was the guy that it happened to. He was working for Don out on one of the sides, and there was another guy working with him, and it was a terrible winter, stormy day, and they decided, the heck with this, we're not going to work here anymore, so they quit right there on the spot. They told the hook tender, we're leaving, and we're quitting right now. So they went up to the landing, and just as they got to the landing, here came Don Wickendall. And of course, he had some unpolite words to say to them, right quick like, and so I called him a panty waist and a few other things that weren't repeatable. And then he said, well, if you've really quit, go over and get my pickup, and when I go down, I'll take you back with you. He went ahead and did the work he had to do at the landing, and it took about an hour to do that. And then finally he came over and got in the pickup and started down the hill, and again, the conversations got real heated and real hot, and unrepeatable words were spoken, and finally they challenged him to a fisticuffs. And so he crammed on the brakes, saying, I'm never afraid of two young punks like you. So he jumped out on his side, and as soon as he heard the door slam on the other side, he jumped back into the pickup and drove down the road and left them standing right in the middle of the 4,000 line. Now, Wick was smart enough to know that if he had hit either one or both of them, that he would have lost his job and the company would have gotten sued. Well, they had to come back down to Allegheny later when they finally did catch a ride in and get their gear out of his pickup, their nose bags and that sort of thing. And when he came around, by that time, they had cooled off and he had cooled off, and so they were on pretty friendly terms by that time. And so they parted on a we're quitting basis. But later, Ed came back and reapplied to get back onto the job again. And when he did, they did hire him, but he told them at that time, I want a job as a truck driver. And they said, fine. They gave him a dump truck up at the crusher. And after a few months, they found out he was really a pretty good driver, so they said, fine, we'll put you on as a log truck driver. So Ed got back to work again. Back in the 1970s, Weyerhaeuser used to make it a point to offer a show-me trip to anybody who worked out in the woods for their families to be able to come in and tour the woods of where their husbands work, and husbands and fathers and that sort of thing. So during this time that they were doing that, they asked Tim Larkowski to climb a tree and top it. And he's now at the top of the tree with the top coming out. After he tops the tree, he comes back down, but the families at that time, there was about 3 Greyhound busfuls that would come out there to be able to take this tour in. And they tried to get to everybody, but this was a special occasion to have Tim go up and top that tree for them. These cutters are a different set of cutters here, and they're falling a tree to the right. They have already got the undercut in. They're starting on the back cut now. Everybody always says, what does a tree look like when it's falling? Well, here it is. I don't know who the cutters are that fell that tree, but I think one of them was Tim Coffey. This is another set, and this time they're falling it against the lean. And they've already put in 2 cuts already on the back side of the tree. And they're taking a block out of between those 2 cuts so that they can set a hydraulic jack in there. And they have to be sure and put a metal plate over the top of the hydraulic jack so that it won't push it up into the tree itself. Then they make the undercut on the opposite side, and then they go back into the back cut, which is right at the top of the jack. They put the saw back in there again, and then they take it clear up to where there's about a 2-inch hinge left between the back cut and the undercut. After they have these cuts all in, they do have pressure against the trunk of the tree, but the tree won't go until they start the timber tipper up. And once the timber tipper is started, that's a machine that's invented by Paul Shook and Arliss Busby, and when they start that up, it will automatically just push the hydraulic fluid through that jack, and immediately the tree will start to tip over. There's about 30 feet of line between the timber tipper and the jack so that they can get out of the way themselves. This is one of the last great big huge Port Orford cedar trees that was left on the tree farm up on the 6565. They told me that they were going to fall it today and ask if I'd like to come up and watch them how they did that. They already have the undercut in, and it's a huge tree, and so Olin Bell is going to show us how big it is by laying down in the undercut. Now Olin's about 5'9" or 10, and he is definitely filling up the undercut. And now they're ready to start the back cut. I hope they haven't done that with Olin still laying in there, but anyway, this picture was right out in front of where the tree will fall when the back cut is completely in. Now after the tree is fell, they mark it into lengths for logs, and then they put the buckers on it so that they can buck it in 2. He's already bucked off the other side of the log already by being on top of the log. Now he's down on the side where it'll drop when he finishes his cut. And his cut should be leaving a lip on the butt side of it so that the second cut side can drop to the ground. A beautiful job of cutting by the bucker. After he cuts this cut off, they'll measure out the next cut, and then they'll go on to the next. Now we're looking at a Washington yarder and a Washington loader. I'm not sure if it's on the 5042, and I think it's Whitey Williamson's yarder. That yarder pole is about 90 feet high, and to hold it up there, it takes about 8 guy lines to keep it in place, especially when it's yarding in logs. Those guy lines have to be tied to a stump down over the side of the hill, and then they're tightened back up to the yarder by the yarder itself. And when they have all of them in place, they're ready to start their yarding. This logging system is using a Skavinsky on the butt rigging. They have a strap between the butt rigging and a block that slides up and down the haulback line, and that way when the yarder engineer is bringing a turn of logs in, if it hangs up, he can put some tension on that haulback line, and it will lift the ends of the logs up and fight the hang-ups. The crane that's sitting there is using a snorkel on top, and that snorkel, it was made and invented by Weyerhaeuser, and it is intended that they can take those grapples, push them on out about 15 feet further, and then when they pull it back in, they got to be sure that they're not trying to lift the log with it at the time or they'd bend it, but then they can pull the log after it's back in again. And this butt rigging is something that they use frequently out there in their yarding. This is a yarder on the 4115 that is using a skyline across the canyon, And then they have a huge carriage that goes out across on the skyline. When they get to where they're right over the top of the choker setters, they drop the chokers down to them from this carriage that's up there, and they set the set the turn of logs on the chokers, and then they lift it straight up to the carriage, and then they bring the carriage and the load of logs back into the landing. That way they can meet all the environmental issues of tearing up the hillsides or filling up the creeks. This is a yarder that has just been purchased by the company, and believe me, they never see anything like this down on the highway. You'll notice as it's sitting on this bridge that the bridge is 16 feet wide, the lowboy is 12 feet wide, but those tracks on that yarder stick out over the bridge by about 4 feet on each side. Now you'll never see anything like this on the highway, and it is something that to get it here, they bring it in by train to Coos Bay. They load it aboard a barge, and then bring it by barge up to Allegheny, and after they get it to Allegheny, they assemble it by putting the gantry on top and getting all the other parts put underneath down there to be able to say it's a yarder now. And believe me, when they start out with something like that up the private road, if you see that thing come, a pilot car coming and he says to get out of the way, you get clear off the road and park someplace. You don't stay on the road while that thing is coming. It'll knock you right off. This is another yarder. It's the same kind of a yarder. Both of them are Skylocks, but this one is, notice it's on rubber tires, and it has jacks on the sides, and you notice you put a log up alongside of him so that you put the jacks on there to stabilize the yarder so it would be level. But the difference between this yarder and the big steel yarder, the big Washington yarder, is that this one only needs 2 guy lines. Howard Slater was the one who operated this particular yarder. This is another shot of the Skylock yarder, and this time to show that it has the 2 guy lines on there. And he tightens those 2 guy lines up by himself. And it is the yarder that Howard Slater ran for years. This is how that yarder works. It has a set of grapples that it goes out into the woods, and he has to be able to see where he drops those grapples over a log. And once he has a log in the grapples, he pulls them back to him. This is what it looks like when he's bringing the turn logs in with the grapples, and he's raised it up enough with the Skavinsky on this system so that he would be able to not leave any brush in the canyon, in the creek at all. It lifts it right over the top. This is a Medill yarder on the Delwood side and a Washington crane. This is a Skylock yarder on the Callahan on the Delwood side. Now you can see that he's yarding from the top of that ridge in the distance over there, and he has a cat up on the ridge as a tail hold, so that if he's a little bit off and can't reach the logs that he's after, he would be able to have the cat operator move the tail hold so that he would be able to drop his grapples over the log. This is a Lima crane loading a load of logs onto a Weyerhaeuser truck. If that load of logs is way back up past one of the reload yards, he will take the load to the reload yard, and then it will wait for a triple log truck to come in and get the load. This is a load of logs coming into the Allegheny terminal. Believe me, you'll never see another load of logs like this again, because they don't load or haul with off-highway trucks. This load is so high above the ground that I can walk. I'm 6 feet tall, and I can walk right underneath that load. And if you take any 3 of those logs off of that truck, it would have a highway load with any 3 of them. Now, a highway load only has about 5,000 to 6,000 board feet. This load has approximately 18,000 board feet on it, which is typical of off-highway equipment. This is another load that came into the Allegheny side, and notice how tall those loads are. We didn't have any limits on height, and we didn't have any limits on lengths, and so they could build the load as high as they wanted to and bring them in. Now, they can take all of the short logs and put them on the pup trailer. If they're 16 to 28 feet long, the load that you're looking at is approximately 42 to 48 feet long. This is another load of logs that's just about like the one you just saw, only this time we have the scaler standing up on top of the load trying to show you how big it is, and that the scaler is Don Smith. He's a big man, and so he definitely can reach quite a ways out. Roger Ott is the truck driver, and he's the one who gave me this picture. This load of logs is another one that is on Roger Rood's truck, and it's just a typical load of logs. It's just unbelievable how much board footage is on each one of those loads of logs. You'll never see anything like this again with these kind of logs. This is a picture that I took from up on the 4200 line, and I was looking down at the falls on the 4000 line. This truckload of logs is just crossing the bridge that crosses the falls. Now those falls are about 80 feet high, so this means for him to get back down the grade that he's on, he's going to have some real steep turns to be able to get on down there. And at the point where he is right now, he would be able to meet another logging truck and pass it right there. But right ahead of him, look at how narrow the road gets at that rock bluff. And so from there on down, nobody dares to meet that load of logs because they will have to back up. That's why the CB radio came in very handy so that he could tell him that he's on his way down the hill, and everybody gets off the hill. This is a load of logs that came into the Allegheny side, and one of the logs fell out into the wrappers on the side of the truck. This is commonly known as a shit-out. Now the truck driver is responsible for this because he should have had it tied on tighter with more wrappers, but he failed to do that. So this is embarrassing to him to have that happen. Now if it was on the other side of the truck, he would have had to taken an axe and chopped the wrappers that are holding that particular log and let it drop to the ground, and then rewrap his truckload again. But in this case, it was on the proper side to not hurt anybody, so he brought it all the way to the terminal. Yeah, there's the truck driver with that same load of logs, and he's embarrassed about it, but he's trying to blame the whole thing onto a can of WD-40 that he thinks that caused the problem. This is another load of logs at the Allegheny terminal, and there's just unbelievable to see these old growth logs, and we'll never see that again aboard another truck. He had a pup trailer behind him. Now we took a picture of the pup trailer, and look what it says. Some guy on the landing had counted 550 years old. And I don't know what that guy was doing at the landing with that much time to spare on his hands. This is another truck driver that's come in. It's Ed Boren. Ed was the oldest driver we had. He was the one who hauled the first load of logs, and then he also hauled the last load of logs coming into Allegheny. This is one of the reload yards. This is the one on the 7,000 line, and it shows the big stackers that they use for being able to take the load of logs off the truck. Now that thing can take the whole load of logs off at once without taking any wrappers off or anything, and he sets them down on the ground behind him. And then when he gets several loads of logs in there together, then they send a triple log truck in to be able to pick them up. This is one of the triples. You can only see two of the loads. There's a third one behind there, but it's coming off the 7,000 line. And there's a triple coming down, but it's just above Delwood, and I think that's Hugh White that's driving that truck. In the 5,000 reload yard, way out at the Bear Mountain Reload, they have a whole string of trucks there. The first two are one truck and it's a double. They have one truck and trailer. And then the last two are just singles that will be unloaded there. And after they take those loads of logs off of the singles, they'll make a triple out of that double, and they'll send it to Delwood with it as 3 loads of logs going into Delwood. This is what it looks like when he's taking a load of logs off of a truck and getting it ready to make a triple load of logs out of it. Merlin Freeman was the guy who ran that stacker, and it was unbelievable to watch him work with that thing. This is a shot of the reload yard at Allegheny, where I took the picture with a 300 millimeter lens from up by the school. But noticed how compact everything looks. The truck shop is there, the scale shack is there, the 980 is there, and all that mass of logs all the way around it. Very compact. The reload yards, both at Allegheny and Delwood, become real dusty in the summertime. So they set up these huge pumps in the river to be able to pump water onto the reload yard, and they will pump through a 1-inch orifice. They'll shoot that water about 300 feet, so it'll wet the whole yard down, and they do that maybe 3 or 4 times a day to be able to keep the dust settled down. This is the dump machine at Allegheny. It's an A-frame, and it has a spreader bar hanging down just above the load of logs and off to the left of it. And there's 2 long chokers that reach underneath the load and will hook into some bells that they'll pull across the top of the load, and they get them hooked together. And then as soon as they lift on it just a little bit and the truck driver sees he's clear, he moves the truck out of the way. Then they let the load swing out over the water and then gently drop it down into the water. And those nubbins are hooked into a pressure release valve in there that when it hits the water, releases them out of that those straps. This is a device that Delwood invented to be able to do away with the A-frame type of unloading. And so they built this conveyor with dogs sticking up in order to catch the logs on, to be able to take them gently down into the water. That when the tide goes way out, the end of that conveyor is about maybe 2 to 3 feet above the water yet, even on a low tide. At the gatehouse at Delwood, the company had a huge supply of cull logs that they had brought in because there was a huge market just for chips only for a long time. Well, they had such a huge amount of cull logs in their yard that they thought, well, why not just let the public come up here and just cut them up for firewood? So every day they would take big loads of those logs out into this yard right close to the gatehouse and let the public come up and cut them as much as they wanted. Did you say something about big vehicles? These are 2 pay haulers, and we're trying to determine whether this is the same size as the old ones were. You can see the new one is quite a lot larger than the old one. They are used for hauling pit run rock from the quarry down to the crusher. Now let's take a look at the other side of it to see what it looks like. Yeah, this is the other side of the truck, and the one on the left, which is the new truck, is definitely a lot bigger than the one on the right. This is the way they take the stackers from the reload yard back down the river, is when they come to a bridge, they have to be able to get the stacker lifted up high enough to be able to clear the guardrails on the sides of the bridge. Now the bridge is only 16 feet wide, and the wheels on the stacker are over 20. So they put the forks of the stacker up into the pay hauler, and hydraulically they push down on the forks until it lifts the wheels of the stacker above the guardrails. Then the pay hauler takes them both across the bridge. Weyerhaeuser had to invent most of their own equipment. They did buy a regular D9 cat, and it already had a winch on it. But then they put the arch on there to be able to drag logs in with an arch. That way they can lift the end of the log up off the ground. But then they wanted to be able to reach out further with the grapples because they're using grapples behind the cat. So they put a snorkel on top of the cat, and that way he can extend those grapples out there by 15 feet further and drop them over a log out over the side of the road. And when he pulls it back up, he has to be darn sure he doesn't try to pull the whole log up with that snorkel extended. So he has to suck the snorkel back in again, and then he can pull the log in. The two mechanics that are working there is Don Barnes is the welder, and Jack Marvin is the shop foreman, the night foreman. This is the Weyerhaeuser's lowboy that went in to pick up one of Gordon Sharp's cranes to haul it to another setting on the tree farm. Now the reason that they do that is that if it was a Jippo logger that wanted to move machinery on a highway lowboy, that meant a lot of excessive cost just to bring it out. And if our lowboy, the Weyerhaeuser lowboy, was available, they could, without even doing anything to it to take any of it apart, they can put it on this lowboy and take it to the next setting. This is the logster, which was invented by Lee Estabrook when he was head of the raw materials department to clean up the river. And it has the A-frame at the end. It lowers a couple of big panels down into the water, which behind those panels there's a conveyor belt, and all the trash on the surface of the water goes right up onto the conveyor belt and into a bin. And when they pick up any logs along the way, there's a boom there that can pick up any logs, but if they're too big to pick up, they will just tie it alongside until they come to a raft, and then they'll deposit them on the raft as they go by. Then when the bin is completely filled, they take it to Bull Island where they unload it, and once a year they burn it on Bull Island. Weyerhaeuser also had to invent and have built a ramp to get down onto the booms so that they could make the log rafts down there. And every so often those had to be replaced. The people that are down on the boom that are putting it in place down there are Dennis Good and Babe Boschman and Bob Barney and Chuck Hillis. The one leaning over, I don't know who that is. But it has to be able to rise and lower with the floodwaters as well as the high tides. This is Doug Jakes. He's the operator of Crane 6. This is Jerry Lebo, and I don't know what the heck he's doing driving a log truck today, but he's normally a mechanic. This is Babe Boschman and Larry Wywatowski. Larry drives the supply truck, which goes to Allegheny and to Delwood every day. And Babe is apparently giving him some instructions on what to pick up next. Oh my gosh, there's Tiny. Now everybody has a story about Tiny, and I can't let you by without telling you at least one story. One time as I was going up to Allegheny, I thought, well, you know, this would be a good day to go eat my lunch with the guys in the backyard. It's just lunchtime, so I'll just do that. So I went to the backyard, and everybody was just running like crazy, and I thought, boy, somebody must be hurt. So I found Red Bramblett when he jumped off a big stacker there and said, what in the heaven's name's happening? And he said, well, come on, we're all going over to watch Tiny eat. And so I went with him to see what in the heaven's name was happening. And when I got in there, here was Tiny sitting at the table, had a sandwich in front of him, and his hands would move back and forth, and you'd see his teeth working on that sandwich. You'd never see him swallow, but when that sandwich was gone, then he'd reach in his lunch bucket and take out another one, and it just like he was playing a harmonica back and forth across right in front of his teeth until that sandwich was gone. Then another one, and he just kept doing that. Another story about Tiny that was just absolutely incredible is he was working as a landing man on one of the sides out in the woods, and there was a whole string of Jippo trucks came there to pick up a bunch of hemlock logs, which we normally didn't use ourselves. And he went over to this one guy that was working with him, and he said, "Now don't panic a bit." He said, "I'm going to do something here." And he picked him, and just reached over and picked him right up by the sides of the head, right by his ears, you might say, and picked him up, and then he turned around with that guy just dangling in front of him, and he turned around to those truck drivers, and he said, "I just want you guys to know who's boss at this landing." And then he turned him back around and sat him back down on the ground again. He was the boss. This is Kenny Sprague. He was a highway truck driver because the Delwood side had, oftentimes they would send loads of logs downtown, and they needed a highway truck to be able to haul them down. Now I've got to tell you a story about Kenny Sprague too. One day as I was going down the river, I happened to see this log truck ahead of me, but I never did really try to catch up with him. But we went through East Side, and then as I got over near the Isthmus Slough Bridge, I saw a big splash of water, and the bridge had been eaten off by the gribbles, and the trailer of his truck was still on it when it dropped. But he had enough momentum up that when it dropped, he was able to keep going, and it pulled the trailer back up onto the good part of the bridge, and he was able to keep going. But he didn't go in the slough like the news said that he did. This is Cagey, as he was known. He drove the dump machine there at Allegheny. I think his name was Sutton, I'm not sure. Oh, and this guy, nobody wants to know him. This is Dennis Good. He happened to be a powder man, a black powder man, and he was all dressed up for the parade on the 4th of July one year. And of course, he didn't really want to admit that he was also one of our boom men. Oh my gosh, look at that. And there he is, John McPherson. He's one of our scalers at Allegheny. Have you ever seen a cross-eyed scaler before? The pay haulers that you saw earlier were supposed to be hauling rock from the pit. Take a look at how much water gets into the pit once in a while, and when it gets too deep, what they'll do is set up a volume pump and pump it out so that he only is just a puddle to drive through. But he, during the summer months, these ponds dry completely out. One of the pay loaders that I had out excavating for a water hole on the 9,000 line, he picked up a stump. And I thought, well, that makes a good picture, so I had him hold it for just a minute while I got a picture of it. Roseburg is about 6 miles airline right straight behind him. Oh, would you believe old Tex Sherrick got into the pictures too? Now, he liked to just show off for people all the time, and definitely was showing off for me when he did this with that machine. It's a rubber-tired skidder, and he's supposed to be picking up logs and hauling them into the landing. And if Wickendall had been right there with me, believe me, he wouldn't have been showing off like that. When it came time for us to destroy everything that we had on the tree farm on the Allegheny side, the first thing we did was to burn the cabin at Bridge 8. I just hated to have to do that, but it had to be done. So that was the first building that we burned. Mel Sackett came by to help me burn it, and that sign on the end says no campfires. Standard Oil had the contract with Weyerhaeuser to be able to keep diesel fuel in all of their machinery all over the tree farm. And this particular truck came down the 4,000 hill and didn't make it for some reason or another. Maybe he went to sleep, I don't know. But that's Jerry Kroger that's right there beside it. Also, the pup trailers don't necessarily learn to lead real well. This particular one right above Bridge 8 happened to turn upside down right in the middle of the road. And there's Mel Sackett there to try to figure out what happened here anyway. These two trucks, or the truck and the grader, I should say, met on the Beulah Creek Bridge. And they hit so hard that it tore the whole front axles out from the truck, and the same way with the grader, just tore them all to pieces. Needless to say, Wickendall had some very polite things to say about those two truck drivers when that happened. When a flood happens, you never know what's going to happen. In this case, a creek that was running there already, the whole canyon that it was in sluiced out, and everything came down the creek at once. And it hit O'Nien's house and filled up his garage, filled up his basement about 2 feet deep of muck and mud. And so he wanted to know if we had anything that could help sluice that thing out again. So I brought him 3 floating pumps so that we could hose that out on the inside in there. Took about 4 or 5 hours for us to get it all. Floods happen all the time, and in this case, here's the Allegheny dump with the dump machine underwater, or the most of it is, but we didn't have good production that day. I still don't know how in the heck that truck driver was able to put that pup trailer up against the truck shack. As he was going back to get his trailers loaded, it was behind him. There's Barney and Preston out there trying to straighten it back up again. Did you know that we had an airport at Allegheny? I'll bet you didn't. Anyway, this is right underneath the Allegheny store, sitting in the field right underneath there. I don't think he flew it away again the next day. This is Beulah's bladder, and I get a kick out of this one. They didn't know how I'd done it, but I had 400 feet of hose from a falls on the Beulah Creek over to this bladder, and to be able to get enough water to be able to use it for anything, I hung a glue bag up there from the plywood plant, and I had it strapped to a stump up on the side of the bank, and then I ran that water pipe right into it, and then a 2-inch pipe from there on down to the road, and then I hooked a piece of fire hose onto the 2-inch pipe and just left it run all the time. Well, I put a sign up there because it was on Beulah Creek, so there was a bladder up on the hillside there, and so I put the sign, Beulah's Bladder. You'd be amazed at how many people would stop there during hunting season to get a drink and have somebody take their picture drinking out of Beulah's Bladder. This is a fire truck that I had made an invention to attach to it. What it is a 6-inch pipe coming out of the back of the truck, an aluminum pipe, and you could open up a 1/4-inch turn valve, and it would fill that big orange bucket that's underneath the helicopter in 26 seconds. We also timed it to see how long it would take him to go down to the river right there and pick up a bucket of water by himself. And that took 26 seconds too. So it was a good timing device to be able to say we can use that on a fire. This is what it looks like when they are dropping a bucket full of water on a fire. I think in this case we were just testing it to see how it worked. This is one of the last fire trucks that I built. It was a off-highway truck, Kenworth, and it has a 4,000-gallon tank on it. It has a Pilgrim pump on it, and it cannot fill itself because there are no suction systems on it. But it has that Pilgrim pump that can pump 350 gallons a minute at 500 pounds of pressure. So it's really got tremendous capabilities. And I had, well, let's see, I've got another picture to show you here in just a minute of how many of those that I actually did build while I was working at Weyerhaeuser. This is the bunch of fire trucks that I have at the Delwood yard, and there was 15 of them at Delwood and 15 of them at Allegheny. Now believe me, there's a firefighting fleet if you ever saw one. Each one of them had 4,000 gallons of water on it, and there wasn't any place in the whole state of Oregon that they could even compare with that, with Forest Service either. This is a yarder that belongs to a Jippo that's out on the Wolf Creek Divide. It's on the Jaguar unit, and there's a water tank that I put there with 12,000 gallons of water in that tank. and it's fed by a stream that comes down back behind where the picture was taken. This tank is that same tank that we were just looking at, only about 6 months after this picture was taken with the yarder standing there, they did have a fire, and I had the tank in place knowing that this would be a treacherous fire area, so I put the tank in place ahead of time, and when they did have the fire, it burned up the whole unit, which was better than 500 acres, and it burned right over the top of this tank, and it was so smoky over the top of it that they couldn't even dip out of it for the rest of the day. But then they used it to be able to help with the mopping up later after the fire was over. This is the fire, the Jaguar fire, where one of our Weyerhaeuser employees lost his life on the fire. A guy by the name of Rick Underhill. And after this is over with, if you'd like to ever see the pictures that I have in my fire school, it shows what the fire did when it did take Rick Underhill's life. So sometime if you want to see them, I'll show them to you. This is the Sea of Tranquility. It's a 24,000 gallon pond made out of gunite or cement, and is fed by a small stream over to the right, up that road that's to the right there. And it is used for helicopter dipping, and the reason that I call it the Sea of Tranquility is that I built it in 1969, and the day that I was ready to put the water into the tank, that is the same day that they landed the astronauts on the moon. So I thought, well, what a perfect example this would be. This looks like a big pockmark on the moon, doesn't it? So I named it the Sea of Tranquility. This is a fire truck that the Delwood mechanic crew and myself designed and said this was what we want to use this for. And it's used mainly for watering the roads, and the operator of the truck has a joystick up in the front right with him there, where if there's a car coming up the road or a truck coming up the road, he can chop off. He touches that lever and it'll shut that water off on the left side of the stream and let the vehicle go by, and then hit that lever again and it all comes on again. And he travels about 40 miles an hour with that vehicle watering the roads. And then the tank is used for firefighting, and a dip tank, because it's 8,000 gallons. And they take the truck into the shop, pull the top out of it, and the baffles and everything out, and then I can take it up to the fire, and then it takes 3 fire trucks to keep it full, so that the helicopter can just keep dipping right out of it, right alongside of the fire the whole time, without going to the river to lift it up. Oh, say, this is some kind of a safety thing that we're doing here, isn't it? I don't see any hard hat on him right at the minute, and I'm not sure just what this is. But anyway, this is Bohemia's hook tender. And we'd sent a load of fire hose down to the bottom of the canyon where Bohemia had a fire down there, and he didn't want to walk all the way back up out of there. Did he?